and welcome to the Moral Economy podcast. This is our third dispatch of the year, and my name is Dawaz, and I'd be your host, one of your hosts for tonight.
My name is Andrew. I'm another host for tonight.
I'm Frat. I'm your other host.
I'm Chow, and I think it's pretty clear. We need another word besides host. What's another word? Chief. I'm Chief.
Okay.
Chief Chow. Wow.
Chief Chow.
Yeah, and
I'm a
that's
host.
us.
I'm a host. We'll go with host.
So that's us, and tonight we're going to be talking about the student protests in India, which maybe a lot of you have not heard about, or maybe some of you have been fortunate to hear about, and it's sort of continuing on what we spoke of in December earlier when we discussed the specter of right-wing takeover of France. And if you recall, even back then I suggested that this is a symptom of a malaise that does not limit itself to Europe, to the comfortable confines of Europe, where refugees are knocking at your door, and a prospect of cultural invasion is something that right-wingers over here are playing into. So what's happening is, in the self-proclaimed biggest democracy of the world, the state is unleashing its coercive apparatus on unarmed students and academics, and coercing spaces of free thinking, critical thinking, and everything that stands for a democracy, and a secular and regular democracy, for that matter, which India claims that it is. So just to give you all a perspective, India had elections last year in March. They voted in Mr. Narendra Modi with a landslide victory. He represents the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is the right-wing nationalist Hindu party on the right wing of the politics, as opposed to the other major party, which is the Congress, the Indian National Congress, which is the forerunner of the Indian National Congress that was in the forefront of Indian independence. Now, Mr. Modi also, interestingly, was the man who oversaw, as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, the anti-Muslim riots in 2002, which saw more than 100 people dead and over 100,000 displaced. He has been implicit in those murders. He denies any wrongdoing. There was a case, there were warrants against him. But still, as a populist leader that he is, he won the elections, and he came to power. And one of the first targets that he set himself, his government has launched a consistent assault on academic institutions across the country. This began in the first place by putting in sympathetic BJP sympathizers. Also, the BJP is also ideologically close to the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is the openly militant Hindu political faction in India. It does participate. It does not formally participate in politics, but it is the street power to mainstream Hindu rhetoric that runs, at least the state of Maharashtra, Mumbai, one of the biggest centers of economics and finance in India.
And they're on the right politically.
Yeah, they're on the extreme right politically.
Okay.
Now, so the first thing that happened, just as a lineup to what is that at stake is today, is that he replaced Modi and his government replaced about 14 chancellors in many state universities with members of the BJP and the RSS. If they were not openly members, I think at least 10 of them are members of the BJP and the RSS, and 4 are at least politically or ideologically sympathetic to such openly nationalist and right-wing ideologies. And this was followed by the liberalizing of the education sector, in a way of sorts, because I think in later in this year, India signs the General Agreement on Trade and Services in Nairobi, Kenya, at the later talks of WTO, and that implies that India will provide equal footing for foreign institutions as well as nationalized institutions. What this means is, this meant a cutting of a stipend that underprivileged students in India were getting. And this happened last year in October. The Minister for Human Resource Development, he cut out this grant that serving that deserving students in India were getting at the PhD and MPhil level, and this is a paltry sum of 5,000 to 8,000 rupees, which is about $500 to $800 a month, just so that these people can concentrate on the research and are not, forced by economic circumstances to divert their energies somewhere else. This led to the first students' protests, especially for students coming from underprivileged backgrounds, and this culminated in the suicide of a Dalit scholar. Dalits are the lower caste Hindus in India, for those who know. For those who don't know, this sort of played into again in January again. This played into 5 students being expelled from in a university in Hyderabad, and this was again following a screening of a film that showed that how the BJP orchestrated again anti-Muslim riots in Muzaffargarh. These happened in 2013, and this movie is banned in India. It's called Muzaffargarh Abhi Jaag Raha Hai. This means Muzaffargarh is still awake. And yeah, these people were expelled, and as I mentioned, Rohit Vimula, one of these 5 students, he committed suicide, which led to massive protests across India, and this was an institutional murder. A lot of people claim this as institutional murder. Protests were quashed, and they were, what's also novel, as I'll talk also later about this, is that the state is not only using its own coercive apparatus to crush these protests. What it's also doing is that it's relying on the street power of its affiliate, the BJP and the RSS and the ABHP. It's called their youth association, their youth union. And these people, it's these mobs and not the police and the other coercive apparatus of the state that goes out and threatens these people, and comes out with alternate protests. So it's the state's use of mob violence as a means to perpetuate its end or achieve its ends that it wants to do. Anyways, now historically universities have been the site for critical thinking and politics, but unfortunately this is being restricted in India, and this is of concern, and why, we talk about that in a minute. But it was on the 9th of February that the Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is probably the elitist university, one of the top universities in India, in the capital, in Delhi. On the 9th of January, they held an event called A Country Without a Post Office. This was organized by the Democratic Students Union. This is a students union which are Maoist sympathizers. And the event, now here's where it's turned. The event coincided with the anniversary of the hanging of Afzal Guru. Now this guy, Afzal Guru, was convicted for the attack on Indian Parliament in 2001. And allegedly he was a Kashmiri separatist and an Islamist terrorist. So it was here that the allegedly anti-state slogans were raised and Mother India was insulted. Now the state was swift in action. Right, on the 11th of February, sedition charges. Sedition laws in India are as old as 1860. They were colonial era British laws that were put in place so that
they're still in force.
Yeah, they're still in force. Yeah.
Wow.
These laws are now being used against these people, that they're for their sedative, so to speak, activities. Some student leaders went into hiding. The only person was that they arrested on the 11th was the JNU Students Association, Kanhaiya Kumar. And the raids were conducted in other hostels to find other people. Two of the organizers, Umar Khalid and Anirban Bhattacharya, were not found immediately right after they went into hiding, because they were the organizers of the event. And because anti-state slogans were raised, and sedition carries it's a life imprisonment if you're convicted for sedition in India. Now this is what happened. Doctored footage. This is this is based on the resources that I've consulted for this. A lot of media outlets are now coming out and saying, okay, a lot of the footage was really doctored. So doctored footage was beaming across television channels very swiftly. The mood in the country was pushed into very whipped up with nationalist and pro India, pro Hinduism, anti Kashmir, even the slogans were just about azadi, just about freedom. That's the Hindi word for freedom as well, and it was about Kashmir, and Kashmir is again one of the core conflicts that exists over there. Not just this, the JNU and its affiliates became an object of hatred. All the people that are affiliated with the university, students, faculty members alike, they became an object of hatred for the right-wing poster boys of the VHP and the RSS. Groups and mobs and lynch mobs camped outside the gates of the university, and this is where it gets really ugly. Now these people, these mobs, gathered outside the university, barred access for anybody to come out. The faculty members and the students could not go out or come in because these people were openly being threatened because of their support of the event that was held, and because of their support for the academic space that they have in the JNU. And these people were openly threatened. So much so that one of the professors, a professor in the sociology department, Vivek Kumar, he was attempted to be shot at. An attempt was made on his life while he was in Gwalior after a lecture. Anyways, but the positive thing is that this outrage from the state and its right-wing sympathizers channeled into positive energy for the students and the faculty at the JNU. They came out in numbers. One of the first marches that was held was on the 18th of February, where almost 12,000 to 15,000 people gathered, and support is being shown by other universities across the country. And this is what's happening. Omar Khalid, the gentleman who was one of the organizers, his case is very interesting, and it also serves to show how the state is demonizing its opponents and limiting this discourse as one of binary. Either you with India or not with India, and you're a traitor and you deserve to whatever be banished or die. Now Khalid, his name is Muslim, right? But he's a avowed atheist. He's a Maoist, and he does not even come from Kashmir. In the press reports, he was suggested as somebody who belonged to Kashmir, harboring separatist tendencies. He was branded as a terrorist, as an Islamist. Now, while they both surrendered themselves to the police on the 23rd of February, and as of today, it was interesting. I was reading that he is a doctoral candidate on subaltern studies, and while he was being interrogated by the police, he was answering just about the development concepts in South Asia and what does subaltern studies mean and all that. But anyway, so this is what's happening over there. His family is receiving threats. Their posters are being shown up with bounties on their heads, and
nobody's doing against anything against.
And nothing. See, what's interesting is that it's not just the state's coercive apparatus. It's also these mobs that are coming out and targeting them. So they do not have it's very scary in that sense that you don't have one enemy that you have to fight. It's hundreds of people out there who are of the opinion that you're committing a crime by expressing your opinion if it does not coincide with their nationalistic common sense. And this is dangerous because a democracy that India claims itself to be should at least allow these freedoms that people and this does, and Indian legal tradition allows for dissent, allows for protest. It's just that it's being interpreted in a very narrow manner by this ultra right-wing Hindu nationalist government that comes out and brands itself, that has done where minorities are being oppressed. People are coming out and talking about how they feel scared nowadays in India. The past, the people are being lynched for eating beef. There's laws are being made against slaughtering of cows all that kind of stuff. So the space for minorities, just so you know, cows are sacred in the Hindu religion. So, and Muslims, the other biggest community in India, slaughters cows for one of their holy events of sorts. Anyways, and it's getting crazy over there. So here's what one of our friends from the JNU sent as a statement, and we stand in solidarity with our colleagues in the JNU. We stand with the values of academic autonomy, freedom of expression, and the right to dissent in a peaceful and non-violent manner, even as they are under siege at the JNU. We, the Moral Economy, extend our support and solidarity to our fellow colleagues and peers in the JNU and other Indian universities as they take on the might of the Indian state. And here's what Sushmita Pati, she's a PhD student over there, and this is what she had to say about this. Sedition charges are not new, nor is the easy deployment of terms like anti-national and Maoist. The aggression and almost a cold-blooded method of the state in using violence and suppression of critical voices, this is new. The state's use of mob violence for akhlaq's lynching to death, for purportedly eating beef, or posters with bounties for Kanaya, Umar, and Ban is new. This is a long battle. It's a battle that is not only about JNU, it is also beyond the question of free speech. We see it as a right-wing onslaught on higher education institutions which stand and speak against the dangerous right-wing common sense. We see it as a struggle for power where the right desperately wants to capture the field of intellectual production. We see it as an onslaught on the system of public education. Critical thinking is something that has always scared fascists. As students, many of us have discussed ever since this government came into power if this government would ever turn the state into a full-blown fascist state. Probably this is the nature of fascism in contemporary times and post-colonial societies. It does not have to establish anything like the Third Reich or institutional or institute concentration camps. The state has to twist the law to use it as its weapon and has to look away while the media and the mob carry on the lynching for them. We realize that this event has raised big questions which have the potential to reorient politics in some way. And I, on behalf of the JNU community, would want to thank you and assure you that we will not give up this fight so easily, and we will not give up our space so easily. So that was the word from Delhi, and that is all that I have to say about it. But it's important, you know, that this mumbling of ideas is what constitutes freedom, anti-national speech, and how this is curtailed, how this notion of freedom of speech and freedom of expression and freedom of dissent and freedom of process, if this is going to be curtailed within universities, and then it's just that self-proclaimed democracy, it risks a lot. It risks it's one of the crucial political freedoms, that is to speak out your mind. This is what a democracy is all about. I mean, you vote as you would want to. You're not voting under threat, under some sort of compulsions. But if you're not allowed to express what you think, which at the risk of offending what other people think, then I think then it's really something else that we're aiming over here at, and it's not the democracy that we're discussing. Yeah. So that's all that I have to say, and I'd like that we could talk about this and how this is something. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's something of sort of an international thing that's happening around. It's not just that the West is shifting to the right. It's also that the rising East is shifting to the right. I mean, India is an important country. It's one of the biggest economies, one of the aspiring superpowers. It's 1.2, 1.3 billion people. It's
almost like China.
Yeah, it's one of the contenders in that part of the region to counter China.
Yeah.
So
it's also being used as a leverage against China.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's being used as a counter to China, and if it's political record, as of what we're hearing, what we're seeing right now, the clampdown on basic freedom of its citizens, on the right to dissent, the right to protest. It's probably faring worse than China, or equally as bad as China. But on the other hand, it sells itself as the biggest democracy in the world. And it's pretty sad what's happening,
It's
and
terrible.
It's also kind of hard to argue against it when a nation claims itself the biggest democracy, when democracy is commonly perceived as going to the voting ballots every couple of
which
years.
is what they're doing.
Was what Chad covered in our
Which is
last
what we
episode.
also spoke of last time.
Yeah. I mean, it's all too easy for states to just adopt this kind of rhetoric and just say we represent freedom, we represent democracy. It's easy to say it, and when you say it, it's also a really strong narrative because speaking in this kind of way has a huge history, and a big part of that history was actually winning these freedoms for people. It was a fight against colonialism. It was a fight against autocracies, and it was this slow emancipation, political emancipation of people. And so these words are loaded and they're powerful words. But now we just say them, and because they're so powerful, many people are just kind of automatically convinced by that. We just say we are the largest democracy in India, and so probably the people on the right wing who are using this kind of the mob who are using violence against these intellectuals. Probably they also believe that. They're like, we're fighting for democracy because they're convinced by this sort of hollow, empty rhetoric. Whereas the people who actually are trying to express other opinions and create a thriving democracy, they're being repressed. And it's all in the name of democracy, quote unquote. Yeah, scary.
Which is maybe even worse is that even if they don't believe it, even if they are cynical about it, they only need to resort to it when in need. And it will work like magic.
Yeah.
I mean that's what I'm saying. Like, now you cannot question. Well, we can question the democratic credentials of the government, but it will always go back and say, we were elected. We were elected by the people with a landslide victory. Yeah. And the good and the what's saddening is beyond just lip service. The opposition parties are really not supporting this cause that these students in these universities are standing for. Because if one of the universities are one of the first places of resistance, they're the place of critical thinking. If they are shut down, if their voices are shut down and they're clamped down like this, by threatening them with mobs, by threatening them with sedition charges that were drafted by the colonizers of India and from,
Would you say that the opposition parties are collaborating with the government?
I wouldn't say that, but at least they're because the rhetoric is so loaded. They would not want to lose their voters, just come out and being seen as anti-nationalistic and anti-whatever Hindu in that sense. So they're treading carefully. Although I believe Rahul Gandhi has visited the JNU and he was there with some of the solidarity events, but it's just that just beyond. Just being present there does not. They have to mobilize their supporters. They have to mobilize their people. They have to come out in the open and talk about this and take a stand on this, which I'm afraid you don't see that happening. And this also tells you how the goalposts, what we all discussed earlier, then how the goalpost in the political rhetoric has shifted to the right. It is shifting to the right gradually. Yeah.
And it also reveals a kind of weakness, and maybe it's controversial to say it, but a kind of weakness in modern democracy that can you vote in fascism? Can you have a democratic vote and the majority of the people in your country say yes, we want to be fascist now?
I think you very well could if Trump wins.
Yeah, if Trump wins, right?
But this is some sort of thing that's happening.
Trump won there apparently, like they voted in fascism,
Right.
But then does that mean that fascism is then the correct system? Is a democratically elected system? And this seems this is one of the weakness I see in a democratic system is this black-white kind of thing.
I think that exactly shows why we don't actually have democracy in the world, is that we could vote in fascism this.
I mean, the principle has to be something about that the discussion is never closed. That regardless of the majority party, the discussion is never closed. That the potential for change always exists. Yeah. And that no party, no matter what their beliefs, no matter how many voters they support or support them, that they cannot eliminate that possibility of dissent and alternative thinking. That must always exist in principle. Or else there's no such thing as a democracy. You can vote in a fascist regime, but as soon as they kill all the people who disagree with you, it's no longer a democracy. Then it's just a fascist regime.
Well, I mean, another sign that we don't really have democracy here is that, if a fascist like Trump were to be voted into office, they wouldn't actually have to change the system very much in order to use it against other people.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
No, but I'd like to draw a parallel. I don't know if it works, but one of the first things that the National Socialist government did in Germany was fire all the university Führers back then and appoint their own people. And it reminds me of Heidegger was appointed as the Universitätsführer Führer in Freiburg, and because they need people, all these thinking critical people, to take their side, and this is where they're most scared of critical thought. If people come out and openly talk about this stuff, that this is something really wrong, that's what's going on around over here, and this puts them then this puts their discourse in the mainstream, and this puts them in the in the right way of things, and this is why this struggle, why this movement is very important. That this is the one thing that scares fascists of all hue and cry. Yeah, that is critical voices, and this is what they're after at, and they're systematically waging a war against their universities, against space of critical thinking. Like I said, the ABVP, the youth organization of the RSS, they went out and threatened very recently, I was reading about it, they went out and threatened the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, which is again a place for, let's say, critical thinking. It's a social sciences institute in the biggest city of India, in Mumbai, and they've come out and they've spoken about other universities where they would want to go and change teachers, the students, the way they think. They should not think anti-India. They should be patriotic. Patriotism is the refuge of this country, as a wise man once said. I don't know who that was, but it tells you, when you have nothing to stand behind, you just take a stand of patriotism, and you ask everybody to be loyal to their government and to their state and whatever that means.
It's a great power to mobilize.
It does. But
right?
Again, you have to see that India, at least on paper, has a very liberal, very secular constitution. It is one of the success stories in democracy in the third world, at least procedural democracy. They've not had the problems with military takeovers. They've not had the problem with, but they're increasingly turning into what was called as a tyranny of the majority, and this is what it's turning into. The minorities' rights are being taken away. Mob violence, and going by the Prime Minister of India's record and their party's record of how they orchestrate violence against the minorities, this tells you that this is their preferred way of suppressing dissent, to terrorize people in this way. Okay, I mean, if it's easy to terrorize someone by use of the state machinery, by using your police, but it's far more worse if you terrorize them using compatriots, people who just look like them, who dress like them, who are just like them.
Again, I have to draw a parallel to Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, but also in a very dramatic way, when the former Yugoslavia dissolved, and people who used to be neighbors started killing each other.
Exactly.
Literally neighbors
true.
started killing each other.
True. So that's sad. That's sad, and this is why this. I personally find that it needs to be mentioned. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be spread. It needs to be shared. This needs to be talked about. What's happening over there in one of the biggest academic institutions of India, and one of the most prestigious universities in India, and it's politics.
And are these students affiliated with the Naxalites?
No, they're not. They like I said, Omar Khalid is.
By the way, for those who don't know who the Naxalites are Maoist guerrillas in India, especially well positioned in the east, the so-called Red Corridor in eastern India. Some reports claim that there are almost as many as 1 million armed guerrillas fighting for Maoist
but that's also another. That's also one of the other things that you don't get to hear about India. That parts of India, the northeastern parts, especially where the Naxalite movement is strong and the Maoist rebels are strong, you don't get to hear about that in the mainstream media. You don't. That's totally blacked out. Nobody.
So what's the relationship between the students and this movement?
I mean, ostensibly they're not. But some of these people, the Democratic Students Union, that organized this event. Also, this event it takes the name, a country with no post office. It takes the name from a Kashmiri poet's poem of the same name, and then again, Kashmir, the disputed region between India and Pakistan, is also symbolically important for Indian politics, and India would not want to give up its claim right on Kashmir, and the guy whose death anniversary coincided with this event was also Kashmiri, and which is why this other Democratic Students Union member, Umar Khalid, who was organizing this event, was also labeled as a Kashmiri separatist, Islamist terrorist, and it's so easy, to demonize somebody using all these labels, even though he's atheist, Maoist, and has no sympathy to the terrorist or the other, antics of the Kashmiri separatist, I believe. But then, this is also how the state is using, how the media is portraying this event to its own people, how it's whipping up.
So regardless of the relationship with the armed resistance movement, the government is using the very existence of this armed resistance movement as an excuse to strike down upon any...
Definitely. It's easier to whip up nationalistic sentiments in the sense that, these are people who want separatists, who want to separate themselves from India, who are anti-India. So, which is why, people from a lot of different, ideological backgrounds would want to support something. People who want to stay in India within the political structure that India offers, I believe, which is why it's being branded this way. And it's easier, like I said, patriotism is an easier to whip up sentiments and unite people for something like this.
It's very popular now to brand enemies as terrorists.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean that's a PhD thesis all by itself, right there, right? Like when did it get so popular to call everybody terrorists? And it kind of, and this is a little bit tangential here, but it kind of flies in the face of traditional realist politics, right? Because it's a pretty solid example of constructionism in politics, because we came up with a narrative about terrorists in the United States post September 11th, and the rest of the world just grabbed onto it. Any government that felt like they had a sector of their society that they wanted to oppress, they just started calling them terrorists because the United States was doing it, and it seemed like a pretty easy thing to do. Let's just do it, and that was just a word, like a myth that we just invented, and then just suddenly became powerful.
Yeah.
Well, to evoke Nancy Hollander, the meaning of the word terrorist.
It's very empty.
It's
actually a very vacuous concept. Terror does not add to any of the other crimes. If you kill someone, it's still murder. It's just that terror does not really add to the crime. What Nancy Hollander told us. That this does not really add anything to the crime. It's just that it adds the fear that is coming out. So at least in this case, it's the Indian state that is perpetrating terror against these students and scaring them and terrorizing them by the prospect of mob violence.
We might be able to say tentatively that the real terror is the use of the word terrorism.
Yeah, totally,
absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. Using the word terrorist as a label for a group of society enables you to act as a terrorist towards that group of society.
True.
Yeah, and you call them terrorists, and then you're allowed to terrorize them. Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, then I guess I will.
Yeah, I think that was for tonight. Yeah.
Tomorrow is the 8th of March. That is International Women's Day. And the Moral Economy is launching International Women's Every Day. So stay tuned tomorrow.
Equality for everyone.
There is going to be a celebration of the day, or you can also call it a demonstration, in Hamburg tomorrow at 6 p.m. In front of Feldstrasse U-Bahn. And our solidarity with the students in JNU, I'm sorry. And thank you very much for
thanks for listening.
Comment and like and subscribe.
Share.
Listen to this.